was an incredible memorization of sponsors. I can't believe that you did that. So sit in whatever order you choose. We're going to do this very casual. My name is Adam Knapp. Thank you for the introduction. It is an honor to get to do this. I was probably more or less raised in the McLeod household when I wasn't at our own household. So it's really fun to be able to do this. Mostly raised because they made me do chores as the laborer in their household. So if you ever saw clean gutters at the McLeod household, it's me. I got to do that. This is a real treat to be able to do. We lost Lady Qualls Sissy McLeod in 2020, in October 2020. And I know we had a McLeod lecture series last year, but I do think it's important that we think tonight in dedication of Sissy McLeod for all that she did for Lake Charles, for her family, and for the state of Louisiana in her service so many years in Baton Rouge, too, supporting Bill, but also all the friends that she made around the state. So just I would say as we go through tonight, let's just remember Sissy and all of the things she did and stood for. We are going to have a fun night tonight. This is really a treat, and you got a great kind of overview of who our panelists are. But I think you're going to find as we go through this why this is so special for the topic we're in. And we have had some pre-conversations to really get to know each other a little bit. But really this is going to be pretty lively because we really don't have scripts. We're going to ask a few questions and just see where these guys take us on the journey as they talk to us about what inspires them to do what they do and how they've come to where they are, and whether or not it's unique to them or something that could perhaps happen to anybody. You know this information, but today in the U.S., we are slowly, maybe not so slowly, losing trust in institutions. The Pew Charitable Trust has done some research on this. They track it every year. You can Google it. Today in America, about 20% of us believe that government is working in our interest on a regular basis. If you look at the Gallup data on this, by agency of government at the federal level, the Supreme Court has about 25% of the folks think it's doing a great deal of work or working in our interest a great deal of the time or a good deal of the time. It's about 23% on the presidency. It's 7% for Congress. Each of those are down by well over half from just 20 years ago. And so it's really fascinating to me as we use the context of thinking about that, as we think about what does it mean to democracy to be involved in civic service and civic engagement, and the challenge or the call to be in public life is really a special and important call, but it's also kind of the founding principles of our democracy is to think about what does it mean to be in public service, or the willingness to put yourself out there as a citizen to be elected to lead at whatever level of government you're doing, whether you're Mayor Nick Hunter and choosing to lead through this really important time for the city of Lake Charles, or your leaders across the state choosing to do that, or at the federal level. But if you're not that citizen willing to be motivated to do that, how challenging is it for our country to survive? And so I think this is really a both timely and important topic. If you've been to McLeod lecture series over the last 19 years, y'all, that this has been happening, you'll know that a lot of these have actually been about the legacy of leadership, whether it was the Young Turks in the first series, or looking at lieutenant governors with Kathleen Blanco, who came and spoke with other lieutenant governors one year. Those were looking back and thinking about what do those institutions mean or those roles mean many times. Well, this is a little bit different. Now, tonight's kind of a bit of a twist on the notion of legacy to think about sort of the impact that legacy has had looking forward in the lives of our panelists and what that has led them to become over the course of their lives. And I think that's really hopefully what we're going to be able to draw out tonight. It's a great opportunity. These are all, as you heard, sons and daughters, nieces and nephews of leaders who have been in public life, who they themselves now are embracing sort of that work for themselves. And as we've gotten to know, as we've talked to them, many different ways and backgrounds they've come into it. So I think that's kind of where I want to start off for tonight with the questions. And this is going to be kind of across the board for all of us, is to start as, so just first, and I think Jeremy, I'll start at the end and we'll kind of walk this way. What was your exposure like to public service growing up? Tell us a little bit about what your experience was growing up and witnessing civic engagement or public service at your household or in your family.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you, Adam, for doing this. pleasure working with you in Baton Rouge and all that you and your family have done here in Lake Charles. And thank you to all of the folks responsible with the McLeod Lecture Series, including the sponsors. And thanks to all of you for being here. And I'm truly, if you are a constituent of mine, truly honored to serve you. It's been an incredible year. It's only just been a year and a half since I've been in office. And I wake up every day excited, ready to get to work for you. So truly grateful for those of the constituents here tonight. So, you know, I like to joke that, or rather, not I like to joke, it's sort of a running family joke that our parents at Stein Lumber didn't believe in child labor laws. And so the moment we could start walking, we were in the lumber yard working. And by the way, the same holds true for political campaigns.
That's right.
I'll never forget my Uncle Tim, who's my godfather, is a quadriplegic. And he was actually the first of our family to run for office. He ran for city council, for Sulphur City Council, was actually the first Sulphur City Council. And this is 86, 87, so I was 6 or 7 years old. And he said, Jeremy, and I'm a shy kid, can barely talk, and he's like, you're coming with me to campaign, go door to door. And the reason why he, you know, in a wheelchair, a lot of these homes were inaccessible where he was campaigning, whether it was the driveway or there were steps. And so he said, you walk up the steps, all you got to do is just knock on the door, tell them who you are, and then point to me in the road and wave. And so I go up to the first few doors, and I knock, and I turn beet red. I don't know what to say, and the person at the door is just staring at me. Finally, I hear Uncle Tim screaming, waving, and so that was my introduction to politics. And so, but ever since then, you know, I get to LSU, and I work in the state legislature as an aide to both the House and the Senate. That's sort of where I cut my teeth, so to speak. And truly enjoyed working in the state legislature during the college years. After college, I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked in the United States Senate, so had some experience at the federal level. And then just coming back home and wanting to be a part of more. But, you know, everyone here in this audience, you know, we've been through our fair share of hurricanes, whether it's Rita, Laura, Delta, and everyone here can say what tree is the most resilient tree in Southwest Louisiana or anywhere in South Louisiana for that matter, and everyone knows it's a live oak tree. And if you look at a live oak tree and that root system, it's a widespread, deep root system. And going back to what's influenced me to run is core values of ours, and I know I sound like I'm on the campaign trail again, but it's truly faith, family, community. And we preach that if you were to come work for Stein Lumber today, we have an onboarding process of our core values of 8 core values. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the 3 main ones are faith, family, community. And you know, we believe that those 3 core values, and this is something I've grown up with, that is sort of a root system that's kept our foundation strong, not just for the company, but truly helping build communities and having that strong, that root system in place has been beneficial. So I think all together, you know, with my Uncle Dennis, my Uncle Tim having served, my father, who was part of Boy Scouts, I'm an Eagle Scout, and so that was a very influential part of me wanting to do more as it relates to public service.
Kim?
Thought that was our timer. Like
That's right.
Run already?
Sorry,
Jeremy, you're done.
I'm a politician now, so I like to.
30 seconds, bud.
So I would say the roots, to share this idea of roots, the roots of the conversation for me growing up were kitchen table conversations, right? As a child, I can remember my parents, both educators, talking about who we were going to vote for, or what issue was happening in the city or the state, where we needed to be engaged or involved, or who were we going to help, who was running for office, et cetera. So for me, it was just really watching my parents being engaged, understanding the importance of your voice and your vote, and understanding that it was not an option to stand on the sideline. It was a responsibility to be a part of the process and to try to make sure we had elected officials who were listening and that we had a citizen government that was working for people. And so that's the work that I had the pleasure of seeing as a child growing up here in Lake Charles. Great to be home. My classmate Sarah, so wonderful to see you, the mayor, Ann Knapp, and others. Just really, this is a special place. And so for me, it was just really seeing my parents engaged, my grandparents engaged, watching the process. I can remember going in the voting booth, getting to push the button, talking about the ballots, talking about what was happening in the news, et cetera. So that was the work that encouraged me to do that. Obviously, from a family of educators. And so my grandmother would say, you need to come back to the family business, right? They were happy that I was anchoring at KPLC or working for a governor, but it was always education is the family business. That is where we serve. And so it's an honor to have the opportunity to be back in the family business.
You used a quote when we were prepping from Maya Angelou, if you would share what that
Yes.
was.
Service is the rent we pay for living. Said by her, by Shirley Chisholm, Marion McLeod as well, others, but it is just foundational, right? Service is the rent we pay for living. Very important.
Thank you.
Sure.
Greg?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. Thanks, Banners, and to be at the McLeod Lecture Series. The idea that I'd be presenting and be a part of a discussion that my father was presenting on the first one, I believe, with the Young Turks is quite an honor. So it's great to be here. I think my story might be a little bit different than a lot of people because, first of all, I was 6 when my father was sworn in to the legislature. So, I mean, my whole childhood was being around the legislature, being around, politics or government and the legislature and the families. Every summer we would spend time with other young families at the Belmont Hotel, and it was like summer camp. But also I really enjoyed, being at the Capitol. And then, as soon as I had a chance to work as a page when I was 16 during the summer, and then the following year, I loved the opportunity, and I loved the opportunity to watch the debates and hear about the discussions that they were talking about. And then when I was in college, I worked for the legislature. I worked for the House as a messenger, and then worked one summer as a Commerce Committee clerk for the Commerce Committee under Ben Baggert, another Young Turk. And then my last year, I hadn't gotten into law school, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to go back home. So I gave up my job as the messenger and told my father, I'm coming back, I'm going to get a job. He says, you can't. So, you got to stay in Baton Rouge. I said, well, I gave up my job. He said, we'll get you another job. We'll get the job back. I said, well, they've already filled the position. And I said, we'll get you another job. And so he got me, then I said, well, I've given up my apartment. We'll find you a place to live. My dad did not want me going back to Norco. So 1 year after voting against John Ilario for Speaker, he evidently had to go grovel to Speaker Ilario to hire his son. And my last job was working next to Speaker Ilario in the summer of '85. And, that was a really neat, great perspective, but for me, I loved the policy. I didn't care about the politics. I didn't pay attention to the politics. But when I left there, went to law school and said goodbye, I figured I'd never be back. But it was always something that, I knew other people could do. I thought, well, I was always asked, aren't you going to run? And I said, no, I'm absolutely not going to run. And then in 99, when young lawyer Gary Smith came to tell me, hey, he's going to run and make sure I wasn't interested, I said, not only no, but hell no. He said, well, maybe we can share office space if we won. So I figured maybe I can teach this young lawyer to practice law, and he could teach me to stay out of politics. And so that didn't work out.
No, it didn't.
But what I did see is, my father was much different personality than me. He loved being the center of the room, the MC at any event, ribbon cutting, and that just was not me. I was fairly shy, and Gary's more of my personality. But one of the things I learned is, especially after Katrina, and I saw, levees breaking because of neglect and people weren't paying attention, that's when I really started realizing that maybe I need to start getting involved. And that's kind of what planted the seed in me. So when my office mate decided he was going to run for Senate, that's when I decided to run, because I knew that I felt, that I could make a difference. And the reason why I felt I could make a difference, because I could see the work that my father had done when he served in the legislature. So I knew that that was a possibility for me.
I love that. We're going to have some fun tonight. Tara?
Yeah, thank you to McLeod family, to Sarah for having me here. It was a very nostalgic drive over from Lafayette this afternoon, thinking about our family's history with, and if you'll indulge me 1 minute, how my father came to be the state senator for Calcasieu and Cameron Parish was through political retribution of him voting or being opposed to the Senate president. So they redistricted him and threw in Calcasieu Cameron Parish with the idea of trying to get Jack Dolan. They were going to convince Jack Dolan and or John DeRosier to run against my dad and hopefully defeat him, with the district being tilted on this side. What they didn't understand was that he became great friends with Jack Dolan, he became great friends with John DeRosier, and he became great friends with Dennis Stein. And truly, and I've never said this publicly before, in his final month of his life, told me that one of the greatest blessings that had ever been bequeathed upon him was the opportunity to represent Calcasieu and Cameron Parish in South Louisiana. He had never experienced in his elected political life the appreciation which he felt from places like McNeese, the Port of Lake Charles, from the people of Cameron Parish, for the things that he was able to work with them on. And he was always fond of saying, when people said, what is your district? He said, I'm the senator from Maurice to McNeese. And that was his saying. But it's also nostalgic for me because I grew up in the Blanco house when we were kids, Sarah's family, my family, and the Millers staying at the Belmont. I will confess to being the one who pulled the fire alarm in 1979 that they never saw. Kim and I worked together in the governor's office in the 80s, and as I said, the Steins were some of my father's first political supporters. So for me, it was, I think, the ability to see how government can work for the good, particularly in some of the most neediest places, whether it's rural. Where I grew up in Maurice, Louisiana, was 450 people, very rural, and it was a bit of a, I guess, idyllic childhood in that we didn't have a country club, we didn't have a swimming pool. I mean, we played in the high school gymnasium in the summer. That was our country club, and so. I saw lots of needs, and even though a legislator had an office, there was no such thing as office hours. People came to your home when they needed help, whether it was help getting into a charity hospital, whether it was help getting their child into some special needs program. And so literally our house was just a revolving door of constituents coming for needs, and seeing the ability that that my father had to be able to impact people's lives, I think for me was a very profound experience, which sort of reconciled with my faith values of that we're given these blessings in life, not necessarily for us to enrich ourselves or for us to prosper, but for us to make the lives of our fellow man better. And so that was a real profound experience for me, I think, at a young age. to see that and to grow up around the giants like the Kathleen Blancos and the Ralph Millers and the Bill McLeods, excuse me, who were, shared like philosophies. And what was so neat about it is that they all could be on different sides of a bill or an issue, throw in the Baggarts or the Hankels from New Orleans, and have just incredibly good debate in that chamber. And then we would be over at one or the other's apartment at the Belmont that night, boiling shrimp or cooking something, or it was all family driven, and that era, sadly, I think, is gone today.
I'm gonna ask a follow-up on that in a moment that I think is gonna help draw that out. But Pilar, please.
Sure. Okay. Is mine on? Can y'all hear me? Yeah. Okay. No? Okay. We'll just go here. So Pilar Ebley, and I'm Kathleen Blanco's daughter, and my career has been in higher education since I graduated from college. And, as Kim said, for her family, education was the family business. And I honestly think the real motivator for my mom to run for governor was she was an education governor and wanted to make a change in our education system, and higher ed particularly. And so that piece of both my parents, so my dad worked at the University of Louisiana Lafayette his whole career. I started out as a football coach, and then dean of students, then vice president of student affairs, and then political consultant on the side. But every day of their lives was about service to others and making an impact in people's lives. And there was really no other path for me in that sense of, I'm going to do something that is at service to others, because that was the example I saw every day. And they were very, there was just no gray. It was right or wrong, and you knew what was right or wrong, and, doing right by others was the golden rule in our house. And, I think they just weren't, just in every day, the way they lived was, if you were just an unselfish being, and so I don't know, that's sort of just the overarching reason of why I picked this career. And I saw the power of education, and I saw the power of really changing lives through that, and wanting that for the state of Louisiana. And many stories similar, growing up around that environment and seeing the change. But it's funny, when Taryn was talking about the banter, every time my mom would tell a story about maybe even being against somebody in an issue, or somebody coming at her from behind, it's like a smile from ear to ear. Like, she loved it. Because she knew she was going to get to the other side of it, and that it was just a difference of opinion, and that they could work through it. And so that also was sort of inspiring, of how much they enjoyed their work and what they did. So I think that's what brought me to this field of serving others.
So I want to dig in on how what you just shared with us was formative to where you are now, and how you've gotten to where you are. In our earlier conversations, some of you shared a little bit about some of your formative moments when you decided the track that you're taking in your life. I also think it's fascinating just to kind of think about your backgrounds. We have two folks who've kind of dedicated themselves into the work of education, a person who's put his life into business, but in service to the state. Two elected officials who have other day jobs, but also do the work of serving the state in elected office in the House and the Senate. So we've got some really fascinating backgrounds to see the life course that each of you have been on. But Pilar, I'd love to start with you. So in that formative years, you're growing up in a very public household, right? In a lieutenant governor's house, a state legislator's house, and then a governor's family. Talk about what that did for how you thought about civic engagement and public service.
Yeah, I think it was just so second nature to us that, being out there and seeing all of that, and, just that those were options for us that I don't think that other people necessarily can envision themselves in, as far as running for office. And really, I think because my mom was so unique, at least I think so, and that she was so unassuming and wasn't the person that you would think would run for office, and was really shy and quiet. And to also see as a mother that, she raised 6 kids, and stayed home with us and didn't work for, you know, a good portion of her career, portion of her life, that you could do it all. And she would always say you could have it all, just not at the same time. And so, and it's a great model for me as a mother of 4 that I can still have a whole nother career. You know, like I've got 4 more years with my kids in school, and, you know, sky's the limits. Like, I don't have to jam it all into my 30s. I don't feel limited. And I think a lot of people feel limited by their career or their choices, just from society or, you know, financial choices and all those other things that, you know, go into how we make our decisions. But I don't feel limited, and I definitely think it was watching her make these huge, monumental decisions to do things that were so out of the norm and out of expectations of the time for her, you know, of her age, of our, you know, status and wealth, and, you know, having 6 kids and all of those things. So it was highly influential, and still is for me.
6 kids and 1 coach.
Yeah, she raised 7.
Yeah, let's not leave that out.
Yeah. I think for me, it was, and you and I talked about this beforehand, discerning where your role is in service is a really key thing. And that was something that I came to the hard way. As Garth Brooks sang in his song, "Sometimes I Thank God for Unanswered Prayers," in 1996, I was so completely convinced I wanted to be a member of the United States Congress. Fortunately for me, the voters of the 7th Congressional District had a different vision, including the people of Lake Charles. So I want to thank you for not voting for me, you know. So, you know, going through that election for me was a real epiphany, because I hated being a candidate. I hated being a candidate. And as much as I loved sort of the side of helping strategize, doing a lot of what her dad did as one of my mentors, her father, you know, of helping to strategize, helping to sort of guide and counsel, and having somewhat of an ability to sort of see things, but not necessarily be the actor in the play, but maybe be someone who helped write the play, not just be on the stage, And I think the discernment that came from me was after that election. I said, you know, I'm never running for office again. You know, I hated every moment of being a candidate, which I just didn't, it wasn't my fit. But I enjoyed helping my friends. I mean, I've worked in probably over 50 different campaigns, from presidential elections to city council to governor's races. And I enjoyed that aspect of it, of helping people and helping to sort of help them frame issues and help them. But the service aspect for me was, I can use my relationships, I can use whatever, whether you want to call it friendships, influence, whatever, for the good of causes without necessarily having to hold a title. You know, as John Bro used to say, you know, around this business, we're all politicians, just some of us have titles. But that really was, to me, being able to harness those relationships, being able to pick up the phone and call a friend like a Jeremy Stein or a Greg Miller and say, hey, I've got a friend who has a child who might need this or that, or we've got an organization that really needs some help. You know, that's serve special needs children or something like that. Using those relationships for good and for helping community, to me was something I really enjoyed. And so for me, it was a discernment of understanding where I fit on the service scale. And for me, it wasn't an elected office ever. So one and done.
Well, and we get a bit of an opposite story from what you shared, Greg, kind of coming in, that you've been avoiding it at all costs until it sort of pulled you in, huh?
Yeah, Professor Jim Hardy, in probably junior seminar, honor seminar at LSU. I don't know how they let me in there, but, you know, he's telling everybody that, yeah, Greg, so you can end up in back in Norco practicing law and running for the legislature. And I said, no, not going to happen. So don't listen to what a 21 or 20-year-old says. But I ended up going to law school. I'd be 3 years, figure out what I want to do with my life, and actually I enjoyed law school. I enjoyed actually being in classes with people who actually weren't just trying to get free tickets to or get admission to one semester of LSU football before they dropped out. And my dad didn't even want me to go to LSU. He wanted me to go to Tulane. He said, maybe we can get you a Tulane scholarship. But I wasn't smart enough for that. But they figured they'd flunk you out. They flunked 2/3 of you out. I said, well, Dad, they flunked 2/3 of the people undergrad at LSU. But I ended up, being a lawyer, I enjoyed helping people. I mean, my dad was a lawyer, but I didn't really know. That was a mystery, there was no take your kid to work back then. And, I really enjoyed helping people. I did criminal law, I was a public defender, and fixed problems for people. And you could get paid a little bit, even though my dad admonished me, you never want to charge people too much. So I don't know what that meant. And then I started getting into, civic organizations and really enjoyed that. But I really felt limited. And I felt limited by what I could achieve. And I thought, what can I do to make a bigger splash, or to help more people, and to, prevent what we saw happen, as a result of Katrina. And that's when I started realizing that's what I have to do. I have to, I started thinking about that, and speaking to my friends. I had a good friend who was who's a successful lobbyist in Texas, and he and I were roommates. He was on a 10-year plan. I was in law school, and he had hurt himself. He was paying his way through college by working at a restaurant, and he was in the National Guard, but he tore his ACL and had to have surgery, so he couldn't work, and he owed me some money. So I knew my dad had a committee clerkship available, so I said, Dad, could you hire my roommate? But he became a very successful lobbyist, and one of my best friends. He was my best man. I was his best man. And talking to him, and he worked for my dad and for the legislature before he moved to Texas. And being able to talk with him about how there's different types of people who can provide, who can contribute in elective office, in the legislature, and that helped me, because it's like I never could see myself as being, Ralph Miller with that huge smile and that just loud, big, almost over-the-top personality. And so that kind of sealed the deal. And I know my dad was very, very happy when I decided to run. And in fact, the night I won the runoff, he told me, he said, Greg, this feels better than any time I ever won. So that, really was touching to me, and I know he was glad to be able to see me serve. And he never ever micromanaged me. He just said, represent your district. And so that's what I try to do.
It's something you said earlier about being focused on policy more than politics. That really is a hallmark, too, of your dad and that generation of leadership of trying to fix the state and many of the ills that sort of are shared across the state. Kim, you've had chapters of your life from being in TV news here in Lake Charles to being in 2 governor's administrations to now being the commissioner of administration. Look, what was that early exposure that sent you on this interesting journey that you've been on?
As I think about this, and Sarah will appreciate, first of all, we had an English professor, honors English, Mr. Methvin at St. Louis, and he was the person who said, you need to go into television. You love to talk. You should get paid to do it. Very good advice. And so I, went into television, which meant I ended up covering a big race of Edwin Edwards versus David Duke. And a family friend, Ben Jeffers, also who lived here in Lake Charles, was working the campaign and afterwards said, you should be press secretary. You should interview for that job. And I said, what is a press secretary? I'm 23, 24 years old. And so interviewed and became press secretary to Edwin Edwards, press secretary and speechwriter. And at the end of the administration, I was thinking about what would be next. And again, hearing my grandmother's voice about the family business. And he was the one who said, you should go into higher education. I know you have a family of your mom's in early childhood, your grandmother and your dad in elementary, secondary, but you should go into higher education. There are very few women, there are very few minorities, you're passionate about education, you light up when we talk about it, that's where you should go. And so I've had this just amazing, blessed journey of working for individuals who cared about education, but also always being drawn back to this idea of service in this area of education. And as Tyron said, how you discern where you will serve, right? Because I grew up with this idea that it's not a question of where you will, if you will serve, it's where you will serve. It's not a question of how well you will do, but how much can you do for others? How big can your contribution be? And so that's how I've sort of meandered through this process of working for governors, Kathleen, Edwin Edwards, working with John Bell, going to Colorado and working for Governor Hickenlooper, leading higher education in the state of Colorado, and then coming back home to lead higher education here. Just such a blessing, but always this draw back to the education piece for me.
And the greatest commissioner of education, higher education in this country, so congratulations on your journey.
that.
And pushing, by the way, on issues, much like we're sharing, it's about pushing forward, not about, just holding the title, right?
Exactly
which
right.
you do exceptionally well.
Thank you.
You said something on our pre-call, Jeremy, that I'm going to make you tell the audience about. You quoted first Peter Thiel and then a French philosopher talking about the idea of mimetic desire. So I'm going to make you have to teach us all for a minute.
I was just
talk
Googling,
about,
I was just randomly Googling stuff and
That's right. That's right.
no idea what I was saying.
Yeah, sure. So take us, that's a lot of what you were talking about is how we get introduced to ideas of service. So share a little bit what your
Yeah, so
background
briefly
is.
on that was, Peter Thiel, who co-founded PayPal, he's influenced me a lot in terms of, he wrote a book called 0 to 1, fantastic business book. But he went to Stanford, and one of his biggest influences even today is a French philosopher who taught at Stanford. He actually taught Peter Thiel at Stanford. His name's René Girard. He, a famous philosopher who wrote many books, but one of his core theories is this mimetic desire. Essentially, we have no original desires. We see a model, and we aspire, and if we sort of take a liking to that, we will try to not necessarily just imitate it, but try to find our way to get to where that particular person has it. Not the exact office, but that same line of work. And so there's no original desires. There's folks that have come before us that we sort of set our quote unquote desires or paths on. And so and I think that holds true for not just public servants and folks here at the table, but throughout life. And so, but fascinating books if you're able to read it. But Commissioner, you mentioned the family business, and if you look at our family business and if you distill it, we exist. Our purpose is to serve others, and I think that comes from those core values I spoke about earlier. And so, in terms of wanting to serve, and the question that we had there with that was, I've always been involved with public service, and at some point I wanted to run maybe down the road if timing was right. And Uncle Dennis and Tim have always talked about, you'll know if you really want to run, the timing is right. And Representative Miller, you mentioned Hurricane Katrina being sort of a big moment, and for me it was Hurricanes Laura and Delta. Mayor Nick, kind of folks my age, seeing them serve has been an inspiration. And by far one of the biggest inspirations for me, speaking of mimetic desires, is a dear friend of mine named Congressman Luke Letlow. We worked in Washington, D.C. together, and unfortunately he passed right before he was sworn in. But I'll never forget, we were right after Hurricanes Laura and Delta, feeding people in our parking lot at the Steins in Lake Charles and Sulphur, and just trying to help the community people were already coming there. We figured we may as well make it an area where we can serve others, not just with what we sell, but also make it a central location where we can feed folks. So we were on social media getting the word out, and Luke Letlow was campaigning for Congress at the time, and he texted me, and it was a guy I'd always looked up to and said, man, keep doing a great job, and keep moving the ball down the field. And around Christmas time, I texted him. I knew he had COVID, and we texted back, wish him Merry Christmas, and he texted back again, just keep moving that ball down the field. And so it was. I still think about him and all the good that he did. And so when this special election, the seat opened up, I knew that the timing was right, that I wanted to do more and serve more, and he was a big influence in my life. And so, but yeah, that was kind of the moment where I knew it's time to jump in and try to make a difference. And look, it's like anything in life. We all have. I had so much experience in the legislature in the U.S. Senate. I figured this was I could best serve in this capacity. And so, yeah, I would be good.
Since you mentioned disasters, it is fascinating to think of the moment when we are all in that response mode, that we forget partisan politics and we're there to serve others. We're in our communities trying to help our neighbors. It is interesting to think of that in the context of what I started out with, which was we have a declining trust in government generally as a nation, and even in our state. We see institutional separation. Yet it is interesting, as I've gotten to know you and hear all of you tell your stories, that you are of different parties. You have different views on the right things that should happen in government, and yet it does seem like each of you does push to serve the state, or push to serve your community or your districts or your roles or your constituents or your clients out of a calling, not necessarily related to a partisan desire. So I thought it'd be interesting just to explore for a minute the moment that we're in as a country or as a state, and how you think that upbringing that you had or that experiences that you've had maybe is a different viewpoint than what we are kind of going through as a nation or as a community. So anyone who wants to jump in first to kind of take that on, I'm going to let this kind of go a little bit more.
I'll just jump in
randomly.
briefly to further maybe expand on the challenge and where we find ourselves today. And I'm a political science major at LSU, and so probably the most influential book with regards to politics in my life, it's called The Quest for Community by an author, Robert Nisbet. And Robert Nisbet, his dad was actually a lumber dealer, so I always thought that was kind of cool. But very influential, conservative sociologist, philosopher. But Nisbet spoke a lot about, the atomization of people being drawn, away from their community, whether it be associations or their faith associations or any Boy Scouts, any type of association that brings communities together. And this was back in early 1950s. He was writing about this, and the concern he had of not just only a bigger government, but also pulling people away from these things that tie us together as a community, whether it's your religion or a particular association that has nothing to do with a big government. And so Nisbet saw it back in the 50s of what we're experiencing today. And I think we have it even harder today with smartphones and being drawn into this atomization that he talked about, where you're alone in your home, and you're getting fed this news feed that's catered to you, and it just further perpetuates this isolation. And as anyone knows, at least I'm learning, a successful marriage. My beautiful wife is here, Emily, today. But communication is key, right? I think with any relationship, communication is key, and the further you're pulled into isolation, the harder it will be to survive as a community, as a state, as a nation. So that's the big concern. How you fix it is whole nother potential topic. But I think the goal, hopefully, as a society, is to continue to meet up like events like this, have discussions, communicate with one another, And I think that's a potential solution going forward.
I can talk,
Good luck,
take
yeah.
this. So, a part of the privilege of growing up the way I grew up, I had lots of different experiences and lots of different people, and coming in and out of our lives. But I lived, I went to college in Lafayette, and then moved to New Orleans and worked at Tulane, hanging out with uptown people. Then we moved to Ole Miss, and my best friend lived in Abbeville, Mississippi. This small little conclave of all these Southern Baptists, and had all that totally different experience from New Orleans to Oxford. Then we moved to Minnesota, and then I'm living in a rural community at an extremely liberal college that my husband is a professor at, and I'm like, literally I'm going to church on Sunday, and all the professors are staring at me like with 5 eyes, and you have 4 kids, they're calling me a breeder. I mean, it was just, I was like, so I've just lived like with every type of political person, every type of, and the whole point of me bringing all that up and traveled and all that is we're all the same, and I have been able to forge friendships in every single one of those situations and have different viewpoints and different thoughts than the people across the table that I've made friends with throughout the years. And I saw that example with my parents, and I guess, I fed into that for myself. And so I just see people, I don't, and I think if everybody could take that opportunity to get to know somebody different, and I know people say it like it's, just such a simple solution, but it really is, because when we were on the call and he said that y'all are different parties, I was like, we are? Like, who's what? Because it's just like, we all sound the same. Like, we all want good for our family. We all want a safe environment. We all want our children to have good schools, and we all want good roads. And, the path there might be a little different of how we get there, and that's where, the humanity of ourselves is so, so it's kind of mind-blowing to me, because then I know that's what's happening. What he was referring to is like we're getting so isolated. And so for me, like, part of the solution for my kids, we're having this conversation about where my child's going to go to college and how much I'm going to spend on where he's going to go to college. And I'm like, if you go, to the cheap place where you have lots of scholarships, maybe you could study abroad. And because I think those type of experiences and learning about other cultures and seeing the humanity of people is so important, and getting out and not staying in their rooms and on their phones and all of those things. So as parents and as citizens, creating those opportunities for the next generation, I think is really important.
Anybody else want to jump in on this one?
So I will say that, I think we are people who are hopeful, but we have to be realists about where we are today. The divide, the political divide, is far afield from what I've heard about the Belmont Hotel and these fiery political debates. I got to see them, right? As a 20-some-year-old with Edwin Edwards and others, and with Kathleen, fiery political debates, but then big crawfish bowl afterwards, and everybody was together. And so we're not in that place anymore, and this sort of partisan divide that we see in D.C. That sort of feels like it's trying to filter into other communities is scary, because it doesn't remind us about who we are and the commonality and the responsibility we have to participate in the system. So when people don't trust institutions, then they step away from them. They step away from voting. They don't believe that these great legislators hear what they're saying, that their voice doesn't matter, that they can't participate in the process. And so that's not good for our democracy, right? It's dangerous for our democracy. We're built on this idea that people participate in a system. It is imperfect, but we are always committed to working to make it better. And so I think it's important for us to sort of think about where are we and what is our responsibility to try to lean in, if it's educators or legislators or whatever our responsibility may be. How can we make a difference, and how can we bring people together? Because it's in the commonality of coming together that you realize that we have more in common than not, and that there is no room for demonization of people because of political affiliation, et cetera. That should not be. And yet it is in many places. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that this is sort of a calling for us, a moment in time when we have to say, what are we going to stand for, and how are we going to move this forward? And how do we, certainly in education, think about high school students doing service projects, higher education students in colleges and universities hearing different sides. I say to our students all the time, college is not Sirius XM radio. You don't get to listen to just what you like. It's our responsibility to expose you to the marketplace of all ideas. And so that's important as we move this work forward.
I think if I just throw two things that I think that I've seen particularly in my work life. I've worked in Washington now for 25 years, but never lived there. Always been a commuter. And the two things that I've seen that have been, in my mind, the most harmful and the most polarizing have been the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, number one, okay? And that's both parties. I mean, that's Democrat and that's Republican. And they constantly have to feed those beasts. And the second is the Citizens United decision to basically legalize dark money. It has now created an environment where everything, every day, every lunch, every dinner, every waking hour a congressman spends or senator spends is focused towards how can I keep up with the arms race and continue to raise more money and more money. And I think, you know, we can't do anything obviously about the 24-hour news cycle, but I'm one who believes that the Citizens United decision is truly one of the worst decisions ever, and it's ripped right at the fabric of the democracy.
Did you want to add something to your
Yeah,
example?
I would talk about, you know, they use algorithms to figure us out, you know, and the news are using algorithms, Facebook's using algorithms, Twitter and all these other things are using algorithms, and we have to realize that we're just trying, you know, people, if they don't realize that they're being manipulated and monetized, and they're forgetting what their real community is. And their community, I had clients and friends, constituents in my office this morning, and they decried about how, you know, terrible it is about things that are happening not in St. Charles Parish, not in Louisiana, you know, somewhere on the other side of the country, and that's what they're concerned with, and that's not happening. Look and get out and see what's happening in your community. What are your schools teaching? And the other thing I find is, as you talked about the book the Quest for Community, you know, I found, you know, if you're engaged in your organizations and you get used to how to deal with differences, but if you only engage when something you don't like happens, you're more likely to show up at the school board meeting or the council meeting and you rage. And that's not productive. That's not the way you get things done. Maybe you can get things done, but that's not a productive way of getting things done. And so when you start being involved in your community and involved in these organizations, then it's a natural progression to say, well, I can be involved in the legislative process, or if I don't like what's going on with the school board, and if you know your school board member and you've talked to him, and you're more likely to call him instead of just showing up incensed and enraged at a meeting. And I find that the more people can realize that and trust that we are there for you, we represent you, we serve you. Here's my cell phone number. People after Hurricane Ida, WWL, one of the sports reporters there lived in Luling, and he wanted to get me on. Well, I gave out my cell phone number on WWL radio. People thought I was crazy to do that. Well, I got about 15 calls from people, and it was very, you know, I think for people to know that your representatives are accessible and are trying to help you. I can't always fix it, but at least they feel that somebody's looking out for them, and I think that's one of the frustrations of people, plus the algorithm and the loss of community.
You know, giving out your cell phone is an act of shrinking the accessibility of government. I mean, literally, suddenly they can get in contact with the person who can affect their lives without feeling like they have to get through 16, you know, different, you know, call centers to try to find a way to reach it. It's a very clever way to shrink the size and accessibility of government, and that in a way is about building trust, and building accessibility is about that.
Yeah, just quickly to follow it up, and when people would be posting on Facebook about this problem or that problem, I had no problem. Here's my cell phone number. Call me and let everybody else know. So
Do you want to let the people of Lake Charles know yourself?
Absolutely.
I want to come to one of the topics that is sort of the theme of tonight is how does this inspire generations? Obviously, it is not scalable as a way to build public service to have your parent or your aunt or uncle also be an elected official. That doesn't work to instill it in others. So your experience is not necessarily the only path. And I want to just put on the table that we need to talk about, I think. There could be some who would say this is nepotism. That you have had an experience that has put you in a position that is privileged to be able to have this role. So I want to just ask anyone who wants to kind of talk about the idea of your upbringing and how you would say that, what you would say to somebody, and you had the best term for this, how you would say something about when someone says that you have this opportunity because of what you grew up around.
Well, first of all, I would say, we spoke about this on the phone call. A lot of people go into the same business that their parents were in or their families were in. So that's part of it. You realize that is a possibility. So the question is, how do we make sure that everybody else knows that it's a possibility for them? I never thought about becoming a doctor. I didn't have any doctors in my family. It was either, I guess, being a lawyer or going to work as an operator at the Shell plant. But I think if you get people involved in, where they feel that they can call you and that they can be heard, then they can get more involved. And then I think that will eventually make people realize they are making a difference. And then they say, well, I can make a difference on a larger scale if I actually get into government or run for government. And that's where I see how we can expand the base.
I also think it's what you do with the life experience that's put in front of you. I mean, all of these people, and Sarah, another good example, have taken, you don't choose the upbringing you have, but you can choose what you do with it. And all of these people have chosen to make this state, these communities a better place and to impact the organizations, that they work in. So, to say that that's nepotism, it's nepotism for the good of whom? I mean, in my mind, for the good of the citizens of the state of Louisiana. I think that the flip side of that coin is when you grow up in a political house, you also bear and this is the part lots in public don't see is when someone bashes your parent because of some decision, you sort of hear that and you carry that pain when your parent is bashed for some political thing. And so there's a sacrifice, and they don't see the sacrifice of time, that the parent puts forth for the benefit of the community, missing multiple bitty basketball games or Little League baseball games or things like that, and so it is a sacrifice. And I have the utmost respect for these guys, and I will tell you, and I think the commissioner would probably chime in, this class that's finishing its 4-year term, I think has been one of the best that I have been around in the past 30 years in terms of Democrat and Republican working together, prioritizing, things like education, infrastructure. Really, this has been a tremendous legislative class, and I have even more hope for the future, seeing, I guess I've met probably 30 or 40 candidates running for some of these term limited seats. I think it's going to be even better in the next 4 years with many more Jeremy Steins and Greg Millers in our state. So it gives me a lot of hope.
So I think just he had mentioned a term, I think, was it the Nepo babies?
Yeah.
So in Hollywood, they're saying these, people get jobs because they call them Nepo babies. But the other part of it is that you might get the job, but then you have to deliver, right? I mean, so you get the job, but then if you're bad, you're out the door. You're not getting the next job. And I think for me, I was raised in immense privilege, but I felt like I had more to prove because of it. I didn't want anybody to think I got the job because of who my parents were, and I left the state, not really by choice. I wouldn't say that I was trying to prove anything with that. My husband dragged me to Minnesota, but I forged my own path there, and I made my own friends, and I became my own person. So coming back, 17 years after leaving, it was a lot for me to sort of, to say that I am a person on my own, and I'm not just Raymond and Kathleen Blanco's daughter. And so I felt like I had more to prove. And I mentioned on the phone, I got a doctorate. I don't need a doctorate for the field I'm in. I'm a fundraiser. If you raise money, they don't care what letters are behind your name. And so, but it was to prove to myself that, that I earned this spot where I am today. And so I feel like I have a little more work ahead of me in that term. So, some people do just take whatever's given to them, and then some people feel like they have to prove or earn it. So I don't know. Hopefully that the work that we do proves that, we earned our spots and that we are doing good work, not just because of who we were associated with as children.
I guess I would say that, I would clearly say I won the parent lottery. So privilege for sure. But I would also say that because I was in a household where education was really focused on being an equalizer and moving people out of poverty to prosperity, it's really, I think it's foundational to your question of how do we make sure that everyone has this belief that they can make a difference and that they feel called to be a part of the system, to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think that is important because when you're in wonderful households with families that are stable, that are functioning, you don't worry about where your next meal is, or are you homeless or food insecure, housing insecure. That is not the reality for too many families in our state. And so how do we make sure we have families that are thriving and that are stable, and that children, no matter their background, race, or place, that they feel that they can be anything they want to be, that education is accessible, affordable, and a path for them, and that within their educational experiences, they meet people like we did, Mr. Methvin, or someone else. There's so many people who will say to you, but for fill in the blank, I would never be where I am today. And so we need every child to get that inspiration, that someone who believes in them, that nudges them to be bigger than themselves, and that helps them to be a part of this foundational work that's so important. Because if we don't have that, people will continue to not believe in institutions, and people won't be a part of elected office, etc., right? And we need people to feel that they can make a difference, and so they get involved and engage.
And just lastly, to piggyback on Representative Miller's comments, and in terms of if you're surrounded by a particular profession, there's a good chance you may end up doing that particular profession. And I'm not sure if everyone's heard the saying, you're the average of the 5 people closest to you. I think that really rings true. I mean, if you're hanging out with 4 other guys that are partying every weekend, and there's a good chance you're not going to get a whole lot done. But if you surround yourself with 4 other folks that are have good vision for life, and like I said, if you can think about yourself, you're the average of the 5 people closest to you. I think that rings true to a lot of what we're saying. But also, my dad taught me a lot, and mainly by leading by example in terms of personal responsibility, and sort of an ethos of you're not shaped by your circumstances, and it's always and a very strong work ethic. And so I think that goes a long way.
I want to use this conversation to ask about how, for the average kid, growing up, they don't know that public service might be an option for them. You have had this great opportunity where you had a way to see it, to understand the power, the impact, as you have each shared about what that meant to you to where you are today in so many different ways. But to an average kid who didn't grow up in a household that had that exposure and experience or hasn't yet, how do you think that person might find their own path to civic service, and what do you think the things that a parent could do or society could do to draw more folks into civic engagement and public service? Anyone?
Well, one, having kids and families involved in their community, so that, I mean, you got to start somewhere, and that's at least my start is where you start realizing that with working with other people, and it's not just you, it's I can't get anything done in the legislature without 53 reps and 20 or more senators, or possibly 70 reps, and a governor that goes along with it, plus advocates or people who are helping. So it's part of that, being a part of the community. And I think if you get engaged, and even if it's as simple as being in clubs at school, that's helpful, where you start realizing that you can have from give and take. People can disagree, and then eventually, hopefully, they'll continue that and be involved to the point where they learn that, hey, elective office is a way of making more of an impact. I'm a little bit circumspect about somebody who's 18 years old and says, I want to be elected. I have.
You mean tyrant?
I don't know how old you are. 30.
No,
it's like, really, this is what you want to do with your life? But so I do think that building that and building, being a part of that community where you've seen what you can accomplish by being a part of a group is a start. It's not for everyone.
I think it's also, and Jeremy touched on this earlier, and we have it as well. There's a responsibility in my mind, if we want to see change in the community, business leaders need to incorporate those values into their work when they hire people, and their employees need to understand what the core values are of the business and how service is a part of that. It is, if you walk into our lobby in Washington, D.C. or in Lafayette, Louisiana, you will see our 3 core values, one of which is that we endeavor to change the communities in which we live through service to others. So every single employee of our firm, is highly encouraged to be involved with some charitable cause or activity. I don't care if it's coaching Little League or if it's involvement with the Junior League, Boys and Girls Club, American Red Cross. All of them are doing different things, but I just asked them to pick one thing where they can serve and give back. And so I think that's incumbent upon us as business leaders to start teaching that core value to young people when we hire them.
Yeah, it's exposure. I mean, if you can, Boy Scouts was great. I enjoyed being a part of Boy Scouts. Like I said, I'm an Eagle Scout, very proud of that honor, but meeting folks from all walks of life with that particular association, being exposed to community service. I get so excited when I'm at the Capitol and schools come through there from all ages. I love talking to the kids from all these different schools throughout the state, and just being exposed to service and serve, I think is the best thing.
I don't have much to add.
I think the notion that you shared too about being called to service in the moment of the community's crisis, I think is an interesting thing to kind of ask. Say a little bit more about you having been in the Scouts, and others may want to share similar experiences. That motivation, that preparation gave you the readiness to be able to jump in at the moment.
That's right. I feel like, are you a Boy Scout too? Because as everyone knows, the motto is be prepared. Brad Mayo, great troop leader, Troop 5 here in Calhoun Parish, very highly influential in my life. But yeah, being prepared, being prepared with the family business as well. It wasn't our first rodeo, so to speak, so we knew what to do. We need to jump into action when it comes to hurricanes entering the Gulf. But that's just like anything in life, being prepared.
So if you were to say, you know, there's a student standing here in front of us, I want to be in public life, I want to be civically engaged, what's the first thing you give them as a piece of advice or guidance? You've kind of shared a few of those, but what would you say to them right now?
Internship in Baton Rouge or Washington. Go see how the process works, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I would say an internship in Baton Rouge or in Washington, working in the legislature as a page or as a congressional intern, really seeing the process up close.
I would second that. I was, like I said, right when I got to LSU, I went to work. I put in my application, and Jefferson Parish delegation happened to pick it up. I worked for folks like Steve Scalise and Jim Donlin, Hankel, and Sorry. Those were all sort of mentors of mine. So absolutely, and if anyone has any nieces, nephews, daughters, sons that are in that age group, send them my way. I'll tell them to put in an application. I think that's the best way to cut your teeth if you happen to be in Baton Rouge, like an internship, or in Washington, D.C., internship or a page or something.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great shortcut. I mean, one of the pages that worked for us about 6 years ago, you know, you start off as a page, and you don't really do much. You know, the legislator presses the button, and they say, "What can I do? Can you go make copies?" You know, so it's really not much, but watch, you know, one particular young man who just, you know, he introduces himself and he says, "Oh, you're from Norco. My girlfriend, her aunt lives. Her aunt lives in Norco," and you know, so you could tell that this guy is going to be engaged. Next thing you know, he's a committee clerk, and then he goes to law school, and next thing you know, he's one of the top people in his class. And you know that this guy, it puts talented, engaged young people in front of you know, legislators, and not just legislators, staff members and whatnot, that can see that this is somebody who we want to keep around. This is somebody who we want to be able to continue to give opportunities to.
I think one thing I would probably say is to try to find a mentor, somebody, you know, because I think it's very daunting and very inaccessible, particularly running for office, because not only do you feel like you have to know everybody, you have to know how to fundraise, you feel like there's these connected people that you don't know, you know, if you're just kind of coming from the outside. And if you could find someone to mentor you and break it down, you know, into doable steps of how you could get there. And also, I mean, to be conscious through your life of the relationships you make and how you treat people and how you serve others, because those relationships will build into, you know, a career or a life, and give you those opportunities and open those doors. But if they could find somebody in their community, you know, and I think that even sounds even hard, finding a mentor, but people want to help kids or anybody. You know, if somebody asked me to mentor them, I would definitely pick up the phone and have coffee with them and, you know, meet with them monthly or whatever it is. And I have had that happen, you know, in my own career and for what I do. So in that step, but then also just to what you were saying earlier, is getting involved at a local level. Because it is sometimes you're like, somebody's running for office and you're like, what have you done? Like, you know, why do you get to do that? And I mean, and I know there are no qualifications to run for office, but you want people to have provided some service to the community, and you could go, oh, you know, they were, you know, served as a leader for the Boy Scouts, and they were in this organization, that organization, and they're connected to the community. And it also helps, then you have people to go ask for money and votes and all those other things you're going to need when you do run for office. So it's those building blocks that you start to build. And the other part is, the difference between the politics and the service and the policy, and to really realize what you're doing is public service. And you're not there to enrich yourself, and you're not there to, a lot of people do make money after, I'm not saying, but that's not really the goal of public service. Even working in the government, I mean, we're here to serve others. We're not here to become millionaires. And so that concept, I think, really needs to be instilled in someone who wants to do this work, that you are at the service of others. So anyway.
So I would say that, first of all, I would say to a young person, your state and your community needs you. Second, I would say there are many ways to serve. I think I'm the only person here whose family has not had an elected official, but I feel like I'm of service and my family was of service. And so there are many ways to serve, to be a servant leader. And then I would ask, tell me what you're interested in. What makes you excited? What brings you joy? And so that way I think you can help all of the things that have been said, the exposure, the navigation, the mentorship. These are the things that help to move you from your vision to reality. But you have to, I think, encourage young people to be a part of it, to say to them we need them, and to understand what they're trying to do in their service.
No, I'd agree that, you make people realize that they, if they find out an interest and they can realize they can translate that interest into a higher calling and build on it. So if they don't like the fact that the ball fields are in that great shape, well, what can we do about it? And there's ways of doing that and mentoring that and saying, well, if you go and talk to the parish president and the council members and the head of the recreation department to find out, why our fields aren't up to par and why Youngsville have such great fields.
That's a very specific, yeah.
Getting personal.
President of the Senate, that's his district.
Bruce got good fields too.
Well,
A university is a great place. This is a plug for McNeese, I guess. A university is a great place to plug into its legislative delegation for those types of internships. I was sitting there thinking, I had 3 interns who have gone on to be prominent. Rowdy Goday, who's a city councilman in Baton Rouge, started off as an intern for me in the governmental affairs department at Acadian Ambulance. And we've had Evan Boudreaux, who was with Senator Cassidy, Connor Domingue, who's now with Senator Kennedy. All of them got started working part-time in our firm, answering the phone, running copies, and just being around it and got moving on. And so a university is a great place for kids to tap into its legislative resources for those types of internships.
those are all very helpful and useful tips. We are running close to time, and I think we have been privileged to be able to have a chance to spend the night with you guys having this conversation. When Vic Stelly was in the House in 2003 trying to pass the Stelly plan, some may remember this, in his closing argument for why the House should pass it, he said, vote the name on the building, not the name on your desk. And I think for so many of your stories that you've shared tonight, you're kind of showing that you do serve for a bigger cause than just the amplification of your own agenda or your own personality and your own self. And so I think we are indebted to the time that you spend as leaders in service to your communities in Louisiana. So if you would, just join me in a round of applause of thanking our panelists. I want to say a thank you to the Banners series, to the folks at McNeese State University, to Paul Hart Miller, to Sarah Judson, who kept the spirit alive, to my parents, Ann and Lynn Knapp, for birthing me. That was nice. And for their leadership and collaboration over the years in service to Louisiana and to Lake Charles as well. Thank you for coming out. And if you would like to have some time with our guests here, we'll have some time to have a reception, as you heard, and we look forward to having this conversation with you and continuing tonight. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.